Yes, computer. Hello, everybody. My name is Donna Freeman, and this is the Yoga in My School podcast. Thank you so much for listening. It is a delight, and we're just launching our 2021 season, as it were, and we're starting off with a bang this year because things are kind of different in the world, and it's caused many people to reevaluate things, caused us to kind of sit back and check in with, things like insurance and legal matters. Am I covered for this? Does this is included? People have questions, and they're interesting questions that have never come up before, I think, especially in the area of legalities and yoga practice and kids yoga with legalities, these kind of things. So today our guest is Cory Sterling. He is with Conscious Counsel, and he has all kinds of amazing insights, and we're going to pick his brain about some of the legal matters that are pressing. I've sent out a couple of requests to people just asking, hey, if you could sit down with a lawyer, what questions would you ask? And people came up with some really good ones. So we're going to be throwing these questions at Cory and asking for his advice, his input, and ways that we can protect ourselves and protect our clients and our patrons. So thank you for being here, Cory. I really appreciate it.
Donna, what a treat. And also good to know that people actually would want to sit down with a lawyer. That's comforting to hear.
Yeah, we could get into all kinds of lawyer jokes, but we will refrain. We might throw a couple
you have free license for all the lawyer jokes that you want.
Awesome. So if anybody's watching, they might notice the beautiful background that Cory's got going on. Cory, can you tell us where you're joining us from today? I'm very envious.
I'm in a small beach town called Caraíva in the south part of the state of Bahia in Brazil. And I've been living in Brazil for a year and a half almost, operating my practice online and enjoying life from a beautiful perspective that I love. So
yes.
That's where I am.
Fabulous. And before we went live with the recording here, I showed him outside where I am, which is in Edmonton, Canada. It is January, people, in Edmonton, Canada. It's currently minus 22 Celsius, just after a major blizzard. Yeah. So where would you rather be? Just questions, inquiring minds want to know. All right, Cory, tell us a little bit about yourself. So how did you, because this is kind of interesting that I was telling people that I was interviewing you today, and I was saying, yeah, I'm interviewing a lawyer. They're like, oh, how cool. And then I said that you're in Brazil, and they're like, say what? Like you're interviewing a Brazilian lawyer? So tell us kind of how you got to be sitting on a beach in Bahia, Brazil.
I started my online legal practice 3 years ago. So I worked at a couple of law firms in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I wasn't really happy with the experience of being a lawyer. And what I observed around me was a lot of really intelligent, qualified, hardworking people who were pretty miserable with the work that they were doing as lawyers. And I put in such an effort through law school and through all of the work that I had done for various law firms that I was like, look, travel's always been the thing that I love, so I might as well just try to start my own firm and to travel at the same time as I do it. And I left on a flight to Copenhagen. I had like $2,000 in the bank. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to find a way to only offer services that I can offer online. At that time, it was just me. Now we're 7 people with Conscious Counsel. But I was like, okay, well, worst comes to worst, I go travel and do this online. And if all of my clients are like, no, Cory, we no longer want to work with you, then I have a little bit of money that I can use, and then I'll buy a flight back. And that was about 3.5 years ago. And thankfully, I'm still traveling, which is really cool. And yeah, and sort of the first year was Europe and the Middle East. The second year was India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and parts of Asia. And the third year was South America. And like, I always loved going to new countries, seeing new places, and I never ever had an inclination to stop. And then I found this one town where I still am that felt different than everything else. And I was like, cool, maybe I'll hang out here for a bit. And that's how I got here.
Nice. All right. I love that. I love the circuitous root of it and then just being open to the opportunities as they arrive and really following your heart. That's beautiful. So tell us a little bit about the principles behind Conscious Counsel, because and the type of services that you offer for people if they're interested in and require a lawyer.
Yeah, I wrote a book in the second year of my legal practice. I wrote a book called The Yoga Law Book, Legal Essentials for Yoga Professionals. And at the time that I was writing that, the majority of clients for Conscious Counsel were yoga professionals. We've sort of expanded to more health and wellness entrepreneurs and small business owners since then. But at the time, I was running a yoga festival in Ontario called Muskoka Yoga Festival. And like, I was just doing so much in the yoga profession. And I saw that there was such a need for people to understand the law, but that no one really wanted to talk to a lawyer or work with a lawyer, and no one really understood, they didn't know what they didn't know about the law. So when I wrote the book, it was like I shared stories of experiences I went through with clients, whether it was, running a yoga teacher training or running retreats, or, the first story where I realized that yogis really needed waivers of liability, but didn't understand their exposure to risk. And that's sort of been the catalyst for the legal practice, doing a lot of work with yoga professionals all over the world and health and wellness. And the reason why is like, I did my yoga teacher certification. I've taught yoga many times. I organized this festival. It's very near and dear to my heart. And it's something I'm passionate about, making law accessible, educating clients, but way more importantly than just like making it simple and easy to work with a lawyer, because it's something that so many people put off. And we've actually distilled all of our systems to like receiving a link, taking 13 minutes to answer a bunch of questions. And then it's like, okay, this is going to protect you for 99.99% of the things that you'll deal with in your yoga business. So trying to make law fun, making it light, and trying to make it empowering is sort of our ethos.
Yeah, I love that whole accessibility to the law, because like you say, we don't know what we don't know. Like we have this love of yoga, of mindfulness, of sharing it. And so we dive into that, and then you're like, oh, waivers? Like, hang on. Is there a template for that? Right?
It's more like, oh, let me just download a free template from the internet for that, that's the consumer behavior.
Right. And so can you give us a couple of tips? Like if I've run trainings and retreats and done all this. I've been in the yoga community for 20 some odd years. So I've worked through some of this, but it would have been so helpful as a newbie in the yoga world, coming into teaching and that kind of stuff. What am I looking for in writing a waiver that's going to really protect me?
Okay, ideally, to put it straight, you're looking for a professional to draft a waiver for you, right? It's sort of like someone who's never practiced yoga at all and has no experience practicing, going into some really technical poses or something very difficult, or trying to do handstands or whatever it is, like just with no experience and without a teacher, right? So it's like a new yoga teacher who doesn't know anything about the law trying to write a waiver of liability that's not a great start. And it's also just because like, I think what a lot of, I'm going to take 1 minute to explain sort of how the actual legal process works in resolving issues and why it's important to have great documents. So something happens, you run a retreat, you run a teacher training, you run classes, there's some sort of issue that evolves. So someone then either hires a lawyer to send you a complaint or a demand letter, or they're going to email you directly and either ask for a refund or tell you that they're owed these damages, or maybe there's someone who works for you or your studio and you classify them as a contractor, but they want to file for unemployment insurance, so they're going to allege that they were employees. When you don't have documents to support you in that particular instance, the issue gets dragged out and becomes very expensive, and then you have to hire a lawyer to put out a fire for you, which costs more than having proper documents in place in the first place. And like, even if you talk about waivers and running a retreat, like I've been through all of this, and I've been hired to draft waivers for clients, and I've been hired to challenge waivers for clients. So I know I can pick apart a bad waiver very, very quickly and very easily. And so, but I want to give valuable and practical information, so I will. But just the caveat for what I would share is like, have a professional draft your waiver of liability. It's like the same way if you know, you're a professional yoga teacher, if you want your students to grow and progress in their asana practice or whatever it is, that they should be working with a professional as well to help them take them there. So that being said, the big things that you want to look for in your waiver of liability is that it accurately describes the activities of what you're doing and what the risks of those activities are. So an example of a waiver that's like not good is like, oh, you will be doing yoga with us, right? That's it. You will be doing yoga and you do not hold us responsible for anything that happens. That's like if someone got injured and they hired me to challenge that waiver, I could do so easily. What you want to do is make sure that you're adequately describing the risks, describing the specific activities. If you're using equipment, what equipment is going to be involved? Like, let's say as an example, you're using something like straps, right? Which on its face is not an extremely dangerous activity whatsoever. But let's say I sign a waiver that says, okay, we're going to be doing yoga together. And then suddenly there's something with a strap and I'm doing something, right? And I get injured using the strap. The whole idea behind a waiver of liability is someone is releasing you from legal responsibility because you clearly told them what activities they would be doing and what the risks of those activities were. And if you don't adequately describe the specifics of the activities, then they have, you know, a little window where they can challenge and say, well, you didn't say anything about straps or blocks or whatever it is. And as such, I suffered an injury as a result of using that equipment that you didn't tell me about. Therefore, the waiver of liability should not apply.
There you go. All right. So we're now into the world of many places can't offer in-person yoga classes, and we're into online yoga classes. Okay. So a lot of people have questions about, can they use the same waiver for an online class as an in-person class?
Okay, so just to revisit the overarching principles of a waiver of liability, you have to describe the activities and the risks. And the activity of practicing in person versus practicing online, those are two separate activities. And the risks are also different because if you're practicing online, likely as the teacher, you're not able to monitor the space to ensure that it's safe. And B, you're not able to provide the same type of adjustments or corrections or observation if someone's doing something. So the waiver should adequately describe that. And then even like the next level to that, and I hate to use, you know, I hate to talk about COVID, but it's a reality of how we're practicing. Now I have lots of clients in North America who are opening back up and offering services in person again. And like, there's a communicable disease that's going around that needs to be communicated and expressed in the waiver of liability, because the whole idea is that you're telling people exactly what you're doing and what the risks of that are. And in any area where you do not address a relevant risk, then your exposure to liability increases.
Interesting. That's really good advice. I appreciate that. So everybody who's reopening in COVID, whether you're online and or back in person, we need to revisit. If you have a waiver, you need to revisit that and update it for sure.
Yeah, and ideally what you do with the waiver is you just have it apply for all of the variants, all the different ways that you're going to be offering your services. So online, if it's evergreen content, like you've got an on-demand library for your studio for yourself, that's also a different activity than you teaching a class on Zoom. And then in person, and the relevant provisions for in person have to deal with COVID.
Yeah, so that brings us kind of to the next one. And this comes up a lot because I know it's come up with my insurance coverage, and they have this kind of caveat that they will cover online classes as long as it is being live taught, so that me and the people are there, but they won't cover recorded, like you say, that evergreen content, nor will they cover Facebook or Instagram Live, where you don't have control over who might be joining you and you can't see them. And so there's these I like to call them sticky wickets because, you know, thank you, British background, about the insurance coverage. And like, is there a way, like, do you just follow what your insurance insures you for? Is there a way to negotiate that? How can we navigate this and protect ourselves?
Yeah, well, the first thing you want to do is understand specifically what your policy covers you for or not. So it's really easy, actually. You just write down on a piece of paper, and like there's nothing legal to this because I don't do anything with insurance, but you just write down on a piece of paper all of the activities you do and how you offer those activities. And then you call your insurance broker, whoever you have your policy with, and let them know, hey, like I do this and I do that and I do this. And just make sure that you're covered for all the things that you're doing. And then I always see insurance and law working together in tandem. So for example, like something that we drafted at Conscious Counsel is called an online disclaimer, which it's not as good as a waiver of liability, but that helps cover people for Facebook Live or Instagram Live, or where there might be some sort of gaps in coverage or protection.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. Like, this is a big question. Lots of people are coming up with these questions right now. They're like, I don't know what I can do. What am I able to do, and how can I offer it? And there's lots of creativity out there, but it really comes down, like I like how you say your insurance and the law need to work hand in hand. And so making sure that you have the coverage and then giving that waiver, the disclaimer is really important.
Yeah, and just like the waiver of liability is the most important. That's the foundation for the highest degree of exposure to risk.
Okay, so a lot of the people who, or I know that many people who listen to this teach in schools. Okay, do people need to have every child sign? Can a school sign for like the whole class? Like how does your waiver work when you're working in a school situation?
It's a little tricky because technically, at least in Canada, but also in North America, there's something called age of majority. And only when someone reaches age of majority can they legally sign an agreement, and like that the agreement actually has efficacy because they're either 18 or 19 or whatever the age is based on the jurisdiction. So the tricky things with minors is that like even though they sign things, it isn't always enforceable. So you want and look, the whole thing that we practice at Conscious Counsel is open and honest communication. So the point of the document is to be really straightforward with someone so that in the event something happens, at a minimum, you can say like, hey, like we told you this is what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. So I don't know. The question is if the school can sign for the kids. I doubt it because they would technically need a power of attorney. And maybe if it's a private school, they sign that away, but I don't really see that happening. So ideally, you would have the student sign it and the guardian of the student, the legal guardian, sign it. And that's sort of like the best you're going to do and the best you're going to get. But something that's also really helpful, if you have a service agreement with a school, put in something that's called an indemnity provision, which basically means like the school will accept any liability that falls upon you for teaching the class.
Yeah, perfect. Great. I knew that answer for me, but I just wanted to clarify it for other people, right? And I love the fact, like you say, when you get hired, usually on a school board level, then you have to usually provide all kinds of documentation to prove who you are and that you're qualified to be offering that service, et cetera, et cetera. And so these are important things that a lot of people don't think about when they're like, oh, I just went into my kid's class and I offered yoga. It's like, you did what?
Yeah, everything around children and the law is more sensitive for logical reasons.
Yes. All right. Now I'm going to move into, before we kind of leave completely this online offering idea, do you have any legal tips for us other than, just making sure that your insurance covers you? Like do you have any legal tips for now that we are so much into an online offering world? How can people protect themselves?
You should have a properly drafted privacy policy. Because that's one of the biggest issues that we've seen yoga professionals being at risk for. So the whole thing is, like I just explained, law as being a series of relationships. And then as our relationships change and the way that we interact with our clients is changing, we need to make sure that the legal documents catch up to that and capture the essence of the relationship we're trying to have. So a privacy policy is like, you have to understand at law, you are obligated to be compliant with rules when you are accepting personal information about someone, or if you're sharing someone's personal information with someone, like i.e. if people are paying through your website now, at law, you have to have a privacy policy where you link whatever service you're using to capture payments. You have to link a copy of their privacy policy, because you're serving as a conduit, or a middle person to someone getting information. So I think like having a really good privacy policy is important. The other thing also is just making sure in the service agreements that you have, especially if you're a studio, outlining in the service agreement that like the services will be offered in person and or online. And just like, yeah, the relationships are changing, the way that we offer our services are changing. So our legal agreements should be the latest version of the way that we offer our services.
Fantastic. I love that. And I love the idea that you're just kind of, you don't just draft a waiver once and leave it and walk away. Yay, that's done. Check forever. I never have to revisit my waivers.
Ideally, you just have a waiver that captures all the different ways that you do it. And then, then you don't have to do it once, but like, so long as you continue to only offer activities in that particular way, then you'd be covered.
So, and I know there's one lovely thing about the services that you offer, and you talk about like real language in waivers.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain that? Like some of the, how to write a waiver so that it is not legalese and people are going, I don't even understand what this says.
Yeah, the general rule we have at Conscious Counsel is that a 7-year-old should be able to understand all of the agreements that we have. And that's just because like I spent so much time when I worked at other places in agreements that I was just like, there's a better way to say this, and like no one actually really talks like this, right? So yeah, one thing that we really strive for is just super clear, simple, basic, straightforward. It's like, hey, what are we doing? What's going on here? This is what we're doing. These are the repercussions or implications of this relationship, and we both understand that it's legally binding. And yeah, just trying to make it more human, because no one talks like that as some agreements are written.
Exactly. I was looking through some documents the other day going, what are they actually saying? Come on, people, just say it.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Okay. So another question that's come up is about intellectual property. And there's 2 things that people have kind of brought up with intellectual property. The first one we're going to dive into is non-compete clauses. Okay. Yeah. So, and especially, so we're going to get non-compete clauses and then compete clauses now that we're in a virtual world. Right?
Cool.
Okay.
not necessarily in the under the intellectual property umbrella. It would only be intellectual properties like the protection of ideas, or or words or logos or something that's written. Non-compete falls more into the employee contractor distinction. And the question is, to what degree can either, can employer or someone who's paying a contractor restrict that person's ability to go off and offer their services somewhere else and to someone else? And the one thing I'm happy to share about the law and the rationale and the policy behind the law around this, but the thing to know is that and this is like why I think the documents are so important, is because it never really gets to the point of like someone going to small claims court and actually enforcing a non-compete provision. It's almost never going to go there. In 4 years of doing this, I've never once had a client who had a non-compete that the situation escalated so far that it was heard in front of an adjudicator or a mediator or something like that. So that being said, it's all about relationship management, and it's all about being super clear on expectations before you start working with someone of what you think is fair and how you feel your business should be protected. But to answer it specifically, so the whole idea is if you operate a business and someone is working for you, clients often want to put in non-compete provisions which say like, hey, if you're teaching at our studio, you're not going to teach at any other studios. Now, your whole question about how does this apply online, it's different because one of the elements for a non-compete is always geographic distance. So before everything was done online, it would be like, okay, you can't teach at another studio for 6 months in 4 kilometers from where our studio is located at this particular area, or like within the boundaries of Greater Edmonton area. Is there a Greater Edmonton area?
There is.
Yeah, I took a guess at that one. So now it's changed because with internet, you can't like control the IP address for where, right? So it's very difficult to do. So the first practical thing I would say is like, make sure you're working with the right people, and before you start working with them, make sure they understand what you're expecting from them in the relationship. So yeah, once you realize that, like, yeah, you can put in a non-compete, but it'll be difficult to enforce. Why will it be difficult to enforce? Firstly, if you're hiring someone as an independent contractor, the idea is that they run their own business. So it's counterintuitive, and it goes against the policy of an independent contractor agreement to be like, oh, like, well, you have your own business, but even though we're paying you 4 hours a week, you can only work with us. Like, never, it'll never stand. And also with employees, it's difficult because government will almost always side with individuals' liberty and ability to support themselves through their vocation. So if you're trying to restrict someone from doing that, you can, but usually it's like they're a full-time employee and there's a lot of expertise in the area of where they're working and they're compensated fairly. But if you have an employee who works, 8 hours a week for you, and you're trying to say like, oh, you are a yoga teacher, but you can't do that with anyone else, it's very, very difficult to actually apply it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Now, so if you're hearing the high pitched or the humming in the background, it's just snow clearing outside the window here. It's like awesome.
But I feel like the sun's coming out because it's brighter now than how it was
brighter.
before.
Yeah, we started in the dark and now it's daylight, right? So it's dark at 8 a.m. here, but by 8:30 it's light.
Okay, cool. Love it.
All the fun things. Yeah, so I really appreciate that. And like you say, now that we're in online, there isn't that geographic area anymore. Like you can access it from anywhere. So, but anyway, that's a really interesting thing to have to negotiate. And I like how you say, people need to make a living, and in today's world, that trumps a lot of things, is putting food on the table and paying your mortgage.
Yeah, and like the other thing I would say is, from a practical stance, you'd be way better to make sure you're hiring the right people than trying to enforce a non-compete agreement.
Like it. All right. So now getting into trademarks.
Okay, that's intellectual property.
That's intellectual property. Okay, so I'll tell a little bit of my story because trademarks are really interesting. So in like Yoga in My School is my company. It has been for a very long time. If you happen to search Yoga in My School, I will pop up, right? And so that's fairly obvious. And then I had people in my geographic area using that term on their websites. Never anywhere else, but like in my town, using my trade name. And so I had to actually, I took it upon myself and trademarked my name just to protect, so that I had legal standing, not just, I've been around for 9 years, what are you doing kind of thing. But so that I could actually go to them and say, no, this is a trademark and you need to remove it from your website. So that was my experience working with trademarks. What kind of advice can you give us? Like, when should we think about getting a trademark? Is it important? Like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would say it's really important. The thing to know about the nature of trademarks is that when you register the mark, it gives you the best priority. So in that situation that you're describing of someone else using it, when you have the trademark, it's like the gold standard. No one really has any rebuttal to that. And then it also provides you with so segundo. Eu acho sua amiga está aqui. Sorry, I have friends here.
That's awesome.
So the thing is that it gives you exclusive use. So exclusive use means that you're the only one who's allowed to use it, but it also gives you enforceable rights. And some of those rights can be like, legally being able to send a cease and desist letter and demand that someone takes the mark down or stops using it. So the real risk that you run is like, by not registering the trademark, someone else can then go and register that trademark and they can use those rights against you. So that's why it's really important to it. And I would say, like, when is the time to register? When you know that you have a business name that you're sticking with. Like, okay, this is my brand, because when you're starting a business, there's that whole evolution in the beginning phases where you're like, oh, like, is this going to be my name, or am I going to change it, or is it going to be this or whatever? But like the moment you know what you're working with and that you're staying with that and you start building everything around it, that's the time to register the trademark, because the risk that you run is by not registering it, that you open the door, you're spending all this time and this money on your branding, on your website, on your newsletters, on whatever it is that you're doing. And then you're susceptible to someone being like, hey, actually, you're not allowed to use this anymore. And I've been through that journey with clients, which sucks. Nothing good about it.
Yeah, and a very good friend of mine, what precipitated me finding trademark was a very good friend of mine. That's exactly what happened to her. She had a number of apps and an entire business and this whole thing and a name and an identity and had been working for years. And someone else trademarked her name and then sent her a cease and desist letter. And she was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, this is my presence. And this other person didn't have any presence, but they had a trademark. And so she had to change everything. And
yeah, the way that it works is you can actually challenge that trademark. If before it gets finalized, you can, while it's in the process of being registered, you can claim that you had prior use. But the two things that you have to know is like, A, if you're going to do that, it's going to be 3 times more expensive than the mark itself. And then B, once you successfully challenge it, you then have to register, you then have to go ahead and register it again. So like, you might as well just do it from the start.
Yeah. So once you know what you're going to be called, because I've seen a lot of people evolve, as you say, right? They start in one place and then they evolve. Do you have any advice for like picking a business name?
No. I have no advice whatsoever for that.
It's like, no, not going there. Leaving that alone.
I'm not part of that.
Fantastic. All right. Do you have any last advice for yoga teachers in general, how we can protect ourselves, protect our clients? Like, we want everyone to have this lovely relationship in the yoga space.
Yeah. Yeah, and most people do have that lovely relationship, and part of why I built a legal practice around working with yoga professionals is because a lot of my friends are yoga professionals, and I love working with these types of people. That being said, the one piece of advice I would say is change the mindset or have a paradigm shift about treating your yoga business as a business. And the reality is, if you operate a small business, you're going to need an accountant and you're going to need a lawyer. And like, that's just, it's like, there's no industry that is immune to that. Mm-hmm. Like, no matter what it is that you're doing, this is sort of, it's the cost of doing business and it's the part of professionalization. And the one piece of advice I would just say is like, the ones who are proactive and in control of their legal documents and their relationships never have to think about the law and really don't have to worry about it. But it's that situation where, okay, I've gone a year, I've gone 2 years, I don't have anything in order. And then it's just like, then it strikes and you get the cease and desist letter or someone makes a complaint, and then it's just not fun and it's way more expensive afterwards. So yeah, just, sort of like, let's professionalize together. I want everyone to have a healthy business so they can serve their communities. And that's part of the mission of why we do what we do. Fantastic. Love it. Yeah. So take the time. Go talk to a lawyer. Talk to Cory or one of his cohorts. Yeah. They're lovely people. Cool. Right? Thank you. Talk to an accountant. Talk to an accountant. And I hope that will be as fun for you. I also work at an accounting office. It's lots of fun. I know all about the money side. I believe you. Sure. All right. Yeah. So these are a lot of things, we all want to share the goodness of our heart, the love, the joy, the benefits of these practices of mindfulness, of movement, but protect yourself and be really upfront with what you're offering, right, is what I'm hearing. And I think that is the message for everybody. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for speaking some Portuguese. It does my heart good to throw that in there. Do you remember anything from your time, from your... Eu falo pouco de português, não muito. Você pode falar muito bom. Gosto de isso. Que bom, parabéns. And it's lovely to hear. It's wonderful that you can enjoy the sunshine. I will continue to be jealous, but I will enjoy the snow. Yeah, enjoy the snow too. I would love to be there for 3 minutes. Like, it would be... Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for listening. This has been the Yoga in My School podcast. We've got some amazing episodes coming up. Over the next little while, we're going to talk about trends in the kids yoga world. We're going to be looking at trauma-informed yoga and looking at the other one that we have on tap coming up is mental health for teenagers, and especially looking at the COVID world and all the challenges that teens are going through right now, which are kind of exacerbated by current circumstances. So that's a few things that you can look forward to in the upcoming episodes. We really appreciate Cory joining us today, and love technology that we can connect from all the way from snowy Canada to sunny Brazil.
Amen.
Amen. Have a great day, you guys. Namaste.
Ciao. Thanks for having me.
Ciao.